I was 55 when my world, or what I thought was my world, began to unravel and then rebuild itself in ways I could never have foreseen. Dr. Daniel Hayes, that was me. A name synonymous with meticulous research and a quiet, almost old-fashioned integrity within the hallowed halls of Boston's most prestigious university. History, specifically early American legal history, was my lifeblood, the intricate dance of dusty documents and forgotten narratives. My office, a sanctuary of leather-bound books and the faint scent of old paper, was where I spent more hours than I did at home, even before the divorce. The view from my window, a patchwork of autumn leaves turning crimson over the Charles River, often served as my only companion during those late-night sessions. The divorce itself had left a hollow space, a quiet ache that permeated the evenings. 25 years of shared life, just gone, dissolved into awkward silences and separate apartments. I was adrift in a way I hadn't been since my 20s, a man defined by his work, suddenly acutely aware of his solitude. The university had always been my anchor, my identity, but even its familiar rhythm felt a little off-key without the counterpoint of a home life. It was into this void, this quiet, academic introspection, that Dr. Sarah Jenkins stepped. Younger, brilliant, with a keen mind for the very same niche I'd carved out for myself. She joined the faculty 3 years prior, fresh out of her postdoc, and from the start, she seemed to look at me not just as a colleague, but as a mentor, almost an idol. Her admiration was a balm, a gentle warmth that began to thaw the chill left by my failed marriage. We started with casual conversations, intellectual sparring that quickly evolved into a shared understanding, a mutual respect that felt rare and precious. Our discussions in the faculty lounge, over lukewarm coffee, would spill over into my office, then into late-night emails, dissecting forgotten legal precedents, arguing over interpretations of colonial statutes. The energy she brought was infectious, almost electric, reigniting a spark in my own research that I hadn't realized was dimming. There was a palpable synergy between us, a feeling that together, we could unlock new truths from the past, shed light on corners of history others had overlooked. I remember thinking, this is what a true intellectual partnership feels like, a merging of minds. That partnership naturally blossomed into a joint research project, a grand undertaking on the genesis of common law in early Massachusetts. It was ambitious, demanding, and utterly exhilarating. Sarah was not just intelligent, she was diligent, organized, her enthusiasm boundless. We spent hours in the archives, the hushed reverence of the old library a constant backdrop, poring over microfiche, our fingers stained with the dust of centuries. The air was often thick with the smell of old paper and ozone from the readers, a smell that always spoke of discovery to me. I trusted her implicitly, completely. She had access to everything. My meticulous handwritten notes, my carefully organized digital files, my entire intellectual edifice built over 3 decades. I saw it as a testament to our shared vision, a belief that we were building something monumental, a legacy, together. It felt like she was an extension of my own scholarly self, perfectly aligned. Beyond the professional, there was a growing personal connection. Dinners after long days in the library became more frequent, conversations drifting from legal history to life, to our futures. We'd walk along the frost-kissed cobblestones of Beacon Hill, the gas lamps casting long shadows, talking about everything and nothing. She spoke of her aspirations, her dreams of tenure, and a significant contribution to our field, and listened intently to mine, about the quiet satisfaction of shaping young minds and uncovering forgotten truths. I started to imagine a shared future, not just professionally, but personally too. A quiet companionship, a meeting of minds and hearts, easing the loneliness that had settled in. She made me feel seen, valued, in a way I hadn't felt in years, not truly. The thought of it, of building something new with her, filled that empty space the divorce had left. It felt like a second chance, a beautiful, unexpected chapter in a life I thought was already mostly written. I gave her the keys to my professional kingdom, and, unknowingly, to my heart, believing it was safe in her hands. The project consumed us. The shared intellectual energy was intoxicating, a constant hum beneath the surface of my days. We were delving deep into colonial court records, uncovering the fascinating, often brutal, origins of legal concepts still echoing in modern jurisprudence. Sarah was a whirlwind, her energy a stark contrast to my own more measured pace, but it was a balance that worked. She'd bounce ideas off me, her eyes bright with discovery, and I'd temper them with historical context, adding layers of nuance. I remember one crisp morning, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves wafting through my open office window, when she burst in, a thick archival box clutched in her arms. She'd found a series of obscure petitions from early indentured servants that perfectly illustrated our thesis on property rights. Her excitement was palpable, and mine mirrored it. This was the joy of academia, the thrill of shared discovery. Our collaboration wasn't just about the big breakthroughs. It was in the small, everyday details, the shared coffee runs, the late-night emails refining a footnote, the easy banter over a difficult translation. We'd spend hours side by side in my office, surrounded by stacks of books and printouts, the quiet scratching of pens and the gentle hum of my ancient desktop computer filling the air. She'd often work on her laptop, cross-referencing my handwritten notes with digital archives, meticulously organizing everything. I'd given her full reign, complete access to all my files, both physical and digital. Treat it as your own, Sarah, I told her. We're in this together. And I truly believed we were. There was no boundary, no sense of mine or yours when it came to the research. It was our project, our paper. Looking back, there were moments, fleeting shadows, that I dismissed entirely. A subtle shift in her gaze when I praised her too effusively for an insight that felt a little too perfect, a little too well articulated, even for her. Or perhaps a brief flicker of defensiveness when I once asked to see a specific set of notes she was working on, only for her to quickly assure me she'd just tidied them up and they weren't quite ready for my review. Nothing concrete, nothing that raised an alarm. I attributed it to her youthful ambition, her desire to present her best work. I saw it as a sign of her dedication, not a harbinger of anything sinister. My trust was absolute, built on years of my own unwavering integrity and the belief that intellectual honesty was the bedrock of our profession. The manuscript was taking shape, growing into something substantial, something we both knew would make waves. We were targeting the Journal of American Legal History, the top-tier publication in our field. The thought of seeing our names, Daniel Hayes and Sarah Jenkins, side by side on the cover, filled me with a quiet pride. It wasn't just about the publication. It was about the culmination of our intellectual journey, the validation of our shared vision. We were in the final stages, polishing sentences, meticulously checking citations. The deadline loomed, a tangible presence in the air, a mix of pressure and excitement. We were so close. I could almost taste the achievement, the shared triumph. I imagined the celebratory dinner, the quiet satisfaction in her eyes, the warmth of her hand in mine as we toasted our success. It felt like the perfect ending to a beautiful, burgeoning story. One evening, after a particularly long day of editing, we sat in my office, the city lights twinkling outside the window. The air was cool, carrying the promise of winter. She leaned back in her chair, a contented sigh escaping her lips. "This is it, Daniel," she said, her voice soft. "The best work I've ever been a part of. Thank you for bringing me into it." Her words, simple as they were, resonated deeply. I felt a surge of warmth, a profound sense of contentment. I had not only contributed to a significant piece of scholarship, but I had also, I believed, nurtured a brilliant young mind and found a companion in the process. My life, after the years of quiet solitude, felt full again, brimming with purpose and a shared future. I smiled, a genuine, easy smile. "The pleasure was all mine, Sarah," I replied, meaning every word. The future, I thought, looked exceptionally bright. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, a week before our paper was due for submission. It was from the dean's office, a terse request for a meeting, marked urgent and confidential. My stomach tightened instantly. Urgent and confidential in academia rarely meant good news. I remember the sickly sweet smell of the dean's polished mahogany desk, the way the light caught the dust motes dancing in the air. Dean Thompson, a man whose default expression was usually a weary benevolence, looked grim. Sarah was there too, already seated, her face a mask of concern that I mistook for shared anxiety. He didn't waste words. An anonymous tip-off, he began, had alleged serious academic misconduct. Plagiarism. My blood ran cold. Plagiarism? The word hung in the air, heavy and poisonous, completely alien to everything I stood for. My first reaction was utter disbelief, then a flash of indignant anger. Who would make such a baseless accusation? And why? I glanced at Sarah, expecting to see outrage, a shared bewilderment. Her eyes met mine briefly, then darted away. The dean laid out the specifics. The accusation wasn't vague, it was precise. Passages in our joint research notes, sections that were clearly attributed to my work, were eerily similar, almost identical, to a long-forgotten doctoral thesis from 2 decades prior. A student I vaguely remembered, a name that barely registered in the back of my mind. A young man who had left academia shortly after his defense. The thesis was obscure, archived deep in the university's digital repository, rarely accessed. How could anyone even find it, let alone connect it to my work? My mind raced, trying to reconstruct every research step, every note I'd ever taken. I'd never seen that thesis. Never. My notes, meticulously built over years, were all original. The dean produced a printed document, highlighting specific paragraphs. He slid it across the table. My eyes scanned the text. The words, the very phrasing, were undeniably present in my working notes. Not just similar, but a direct lift. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. But how? My notes, I thought. My notes. Then it hit me with the force of a physical blow. My research notes. All of them. The physical ones, the digital ones. They had been in Sarah's possession for months, for the better part of our collaboration. She had organized them, cross-referenced them, integrated them. I had given her unfettered access, trusting her completely with the raw material of my intellectual life. The dean explained that the university's preliminary review had focused on the digital versions of my notes, the ones Sarah had been curating. There were timestamps, version histories. It looked damning. It looked like my work. Sarah, sensing my growing horror, spoke up, her voice trembling slightly. Dr. Hayes, I can't believe this. I'm as shocked as you are. She looked at the dean, then back at me, her expression a careful blend of sorrow and disappointment. I just followed the files you gave me. I assumed everything was original. I would never have knowingly included plagiarized material. Her words were like daggers, each one twisting in the wound of my dawning realization. Misled. That was the word she used. Misled. My mind replayed countless interactions, small details I'd dismissed. Her quick dismissal of my request to see notes she'd just tidied. Her eagerness to handle all the digital organization. Her subtle shifts in gaze. It all coalesced into a terrifying, undeniable image. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening precision. She hadn't just followed my files. She had manipulated them. She had meticulously planted those passages, knowing my trust in her would provide the perfect cover. She had used my own integrity as a weapon against me. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. The polished mahogany table suddenly felt like an executioner's block. My world, which had felt so full, so promising just days ago, was crumbling into dust. The betrayal wasn't just intellectual, it was a profound, personal devastation. The days that followed blurred into a suffocating nightmare. The university investigation moved with a horrifying efficiency. Hearings, interviews, legal counsel. Each step felt like another nail in the coffin of my career, my reputation, my very identity. The accusation of plagiarism, that insidious stain, spread like a virus through the department, through the entire academic community. I could feel the whispers, the sidelong glances, the unspoken judgments. My colleagues, once sources of intellectual camaraderie, now looked at me with a mixture of pity and condemnation. It was a loneliness far deeper than anything the divorce had inflicted. This was the loneliness of being publicly disgraced, of having your life's work called into question. Sarah, true to her carefully constructed narrative, publicly distanced herself with devastating precision. She issued a statement, circulated through the university channels, expressing her deep shock and profound disappointment in the discovery of the plagiarized material. She claimed she had been misled by the source materials provided and had acted in good faith, assuming the integrity of all research handed to her. Her voice, when she spoke to the press. A local newspaper had picked up on the scandal, of course, was laced with a feigned sadness, a mournful disbelief. She managed to portray herself as a victim, a promising young scholar whose trust had been cruelly exploited by a revered, but ultimately flawed, elder statesman of academia. It was a performance worthy of an Oscar, and it was crushing me. I remember reading her statement, sitting in my now empty office, the books on the shelves seeming to mock me with their silent wisdom. The words blurred, but the message was stark. She was innocent, and I was the culprit. The anger that surged through me was a raw, visceral thing, unlike any emotion I had ever known. It wasn't just the professional ruin. It was the gut-wrenching betrayal of trust, of companionship, of a future I had allowed myself to dream of. Every kind word, every shared laugh, every late-night discussion, every moment of intimacy, it was all tainted, twisted into a calculated maneuver in her elaborate scheme. She had played me, meticulously, expertly. The anonymous tip-off? I now suspected it was her, a final, chilling act to ensure the spotlight was squarely on me, making her discovery of the plagiarism seem entirely innocent. She had known the obscure thesis existed. She had integrated its passages into my digital notes, subtly, carefully, knowing that my reputation for integrity would be my greatest vulnerability. Who would suspect me of such a thing? And with her having full access to my files, who would suspect her of tampering? It was a perfect frame, an ivory tower frame, as I bitterly started to call it in my head. A brilliant trap, sprung with cold, clinical precision. My career, the very bedrock of my existence, lay in ruins. The joint paper, once a source of such pride, was now a poisoned chalice. The submission deadline came and went, unnoticed amidst the chaos. I was suspended, stripped of my teaching duties, my access to the university archives revoked. Each day brought a fresh wave of despair, a deeper plunge into the abyss of public humiliation and personal devastation. I felt hollowed out, a ghost haunting the corridors of a life that no longer belonged to me. The city outside, once a vibrant backdrop to my intellectual pursuits, now felt indifferent, its bustling energy a painful contrast to my shattered world. All I could see was her face, her feigned sympathy, and the chilling realization that everything I had believed in, everything I had hoped for, was a lie. The initial despair was so profound, so absolute, that I genuinely considered just letting it all go, retiring quietly, disappearing from public life, becoming a footnote of academic infamy. But then, in the suffocating silence of my disgrace, a different emotion began to stir, a cold, hard anger. It wasn't the hot, impulsive anger of youth, but a deep, simmering rage born of injustice and profound betrayal. I had dedicated my entire life to truth and integrity. I would not let it end with a lie. I would not let her win. My long-standing reputation, though currently under siege, was not entirely extinguished. There were colleagues, older ones, who knew my character, who remembered the painstaking detail of my work over decades. They expressed quiet, cautious support, a few offering to testify to my scrupulous nature. It was a small flicker of light in the overwhelming darkness. More importantly, I found a legal team, recommended by a former student now a prominent attorney, who believed in my innocence. They specialized in complex academic disputes, and they approached my case with a tenacity that matched my own burgeoning resolve. Their strategy was clear. If Sarah had planted the evidence, there had to be a digital trail. We needed to prove manipulation. This meant forensic analysis of every single file, every version, every timestamp. It was a daunting task, like searching for a single grain of sand on a vast beach, but I supplied them with everything I had. My old hard drives, my personal archives, every email exchange, every shared document. I spent hours with their technical experts, reconstructing timelines, explaining my workflow, detailing Sarah's access and her responsibilities. It felt like an inverse archaeological dig, unearthing not ancient history, but a recent, meticulously buried crime. The process was agonizingly slow, each day a battle against doubt and the gnawing anxiety of uncertainty. There were moments when I feared it was hopeless, that her scheme was too perfect, too untraceable. I'd wake in a cold sweat, the memory of her feigned shock vivid in my mind. But then I'd remember the quiet support of a few old friends, the determined faces of my legal team, and the burning conviction that I was innocent. I kept reminding myself of the core principle of my discipline. The truth is always there, waiting to be uncovered, no matter how deeply buried. Weeks turned into months. The university bureaucracy, initially so swift to condemn, now moved with glacial slowness as the legal challenge gained traction. My lawyers kept pressing, meticulously dissecting the digital evidence. They focused on the version control of the shared research documents, the exact moments when the plagiarized passages appeared, and who had access at those specific times. They looked for anomalies, for digital fingerprints. And slowly, painstakingly, they started to find them. Small discrepancies in file metadata, unusual access patterns, subtle alterations that pointed away from my authorship and towards a third-party intervention. Specifically, towards Sarah's university network ID, her personal devices, her digital footprint. The initial glimmers of hope were faint, almost imperceptible, but they were there, like distant stars. In a moonless sky, I wasn't just fighting for my career anymore. I was fighting for my dignity, for the truth, for the very essence of who I was. And for the first time in months, I felt a fragile sense of purpose returning. The turning point came with the digital forensics report. It was a dense, highly technical document, but its conclusions were devastatingly clear. The legal team presented irrefutable evidence, a pattern of calculated manipulation, specific timestamps, and IP addresses linked directly to Sarah Jenkins. It showed how she had meticulously inserted the plagiarized content into my digital research notes, often late at night, when I was home, believing my work was safe in our shared drive. It detailed how she had then subtly altered version histories to obscure her tracks, making it appear as though the plagiarized passages had been present from an earlier stage, attributable to my initial contributions. Her carefully constructed narrative crumbled under the weight of hard data. The university, faced with such incontrovertible proof, had no choice. The internal investigation, which had initially leaned heavily on her testimony and the circumstantial evidence against me, now swung dramatically. Sarah Jenkins was formally accused of academic fraud and professional misconduct. The hearings were swift, brutal. She tried to deny it, to spin new tales, but the digital evidence was a silent, unyielding witness. Her carefully cultivated image of the brilliant, wronged scholar shattered, revealing the calculating ambition beneath. She was summarily dismissed from the university. Her name, once whispered with admiration, was now associated with scandal. The academic community, a small, insular world, blacklisted her with a swiftness that was almost frightening. No other reputable institution would touch her. Her career, which she had so ruthlessly attempted to build on the ruins of mine, was over, extinguished before it had even truly begun. There was a grim satisfaction in that, a sense of justice finally served. I was officially cleared of all wrongdoing. The university issued a formal apology, a quiet, almost understated statement, but it was enough. My name, once dragged through the mud, was restored. The whispers didn't entirely disappear. Of course, scars like that linger. But the condemnation lifted, replaced by a quiet respect, even admiration, for my resilience. The wave of relief that washed over me was immense, liberating. The suffocating weight I had carried for months finally eased, allowing me to breathe freely again. Yet, despite being vindicated, something fundamental had shifted within me. The halls of academia, once a sanctuary, now felt tainted. The ivory tower that had defined my life, the very institution I had dedicated decades to, had nearly crushed me. The trust, not just in Sarah, but in the systems, in the inherent honesty of intellectual pursuit, was irrevocably broken. I looked at the familiar faces of my colleagues, some of whom had judged me so quickly, and felt a profound disillusionment. The politics, the ambition, the quiet backstabbing, it all seemed too much. So, I made a decision. I chose to retire from institutional academia. It wasn't an easy choice. The university was all I had ever known. But the thought of returning to that office, walking those corridors, felt like wearing a borrowed skin. I needed a fresh start, a different kind of purpose. I wanted to reclaim my narrative, not just clear my name. The liberation wasn't just from the accusation. It was from the confines of a world that had almost destroyed me. I packed up my office, the scent of old paper no longer comforting, but a reminder of battles fought. The Boston skyline, once a symbol of my steady, predictable life, now represented a horizon of unknown possibilities, a future I was ready to forge on my own terms. Stepping away from the university was like shedding an old skin. The initial days were strange, a quiet, disorienting void where the familiar rhythm of lectures, committee meetings, and student consultations used to be. The quiet of my home, once a source of loneliness, now felt like a canvas waiting to be painted. I spent weeks just thinking, rereading my old notes, not for a paper, but for myself. The passion for history, for uncovering forgotten stories, was still there, vibrant and alive, but it needed a new outlet, a different kind of stage. The ivory tower had nearly broken me, but it hadn't extinguished my intellectual curiosity. In fact, the experience had sharpened it, given me a new perspective. I wanted to tell stories, real stories, not just for peer-reviewed journals read by a handful of specialists, but for a wider audience, for people who genuinely loved history but found academic prose impenetrable. I started writing, not in the rigid, footnoted style of my former life, but with a narrative flair, a focus on the human drama behind the historical facts. It felt raw, liberating. I was reclaiming my voice, my narrative, not just from Sarah, but from the very institution that had almost silenced me. My first independent book, a comprehensive re-examination of colonial legal systems, became a surprise success. It wasn't dry academia. It was engaging, accessible, infused with the lessons I'd learned about trust and betrayal, about the hidden currents beneath the surface of seemingly stable structures. I published it under my own name, a name now synonymous not with scandal, but with resilience. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very research that had nearly destroyed me, the subject of that ill-fated joint paper, now formed the bedrock of my most popular work. A series of popular history books followed, each one allowing me to delve into subjects I loved, unburdened by academic politics or the need for tenure. I found a new, unexpected joy in connecting directly with readers, in seeing their enthusiasm, in knowing that my work was reaching far beyond the confines of a dusty archive or a university lecture hall. I gave talks, not in lecture theaters, but in community centers, libraries, and even online forums, sharing my passion with people who genuinely wanted to listen. It was a different kind of validation, a truer one. The wounds of the past never fully vanished. There's still a lingering shadow, a faint ache when I think of the betrayal, the naive trust one once placed in Sarah. It taught me a harsh lesson about human nature, about ambition and deceit, a lesson I carry with me. My capacity for absolute, unquestioning trust, particularly in professional settings, is gone. It's a bittersweet wisdom. I gained my freedom, but I lost a piece of my innocence, a certain optimistic view of the world. But I also found a profound sense of liberation. I am no longer defined by a title or an institution. I am Daniel Hayes, independent historian, a storyteller. The Boston skyline, which once seemed to watch my quiet despair, now felt like a backdrop to a life fully lived on my own terms. My office is still filled with books, but now it's also filled with the warmth of natural light and the hum of my own creative energy. The quiet evenings, once filled with solitude, are now filled with purpose, with the satisfying click of keyboard keys as I write the next chapter, not just of a book, but of my own reclaimed life. It wasn't the future I had envisioned with Sarah, but it was a future, a richer, more authentic one, forged in the crucible of betrayal and ultimately built on my own unbreakable integrity.